Hello, I'm Craig Constantine. Welcome to Pod Talk, short conversations with podcast creators that are not just about podcasting because I'd like to take the scenic route. My guest today is Moe Poplar. Welcome, Moe. How are you?
Hey, Craig. Happy what? Today's Wednesday. Happy Wednesday.
Wednesday. Yeah. What
Whatever
day
day.
is it?
What day? Happy whatever day you're hearing this.
Yeah. Happy day that ends in Y.
Mhm.
But thank you. It is a lovely Wednesday where I am. I'm hoping the weather is nice where you are.
It
We
is.
had a chance. We've exchanged a bunch of messages, over the last year, randomly here and there. And then, of course, as everybody knows, we've been talking for a while before I hit the record button. And I was actually kind of torn because there were a couple of different, like completely different things we could talk about here. I mean, they're all in the realm of podcasting, but different ways to go. But rather than workshop my crazy podcast ideas, which was one possibility, your I'm going to say like your original calling, like your passion is really around writing and production, not really around being on mic, right?
Absolutely. And my calling and passion is around storytelling.
Oh,
Um,
even better.
but storytelling in a way that kind of has a little polish and finesse to it. So I'm definitely that podcaster who came to podcasting, and the last thing I wanted to do was an interview show. Um, I It's not that I don't think interview shows are great. I listen to a ton of them, but as a
Not your jam.
storyteller, I'm much more interested in creating a level of distraction and entertainment that take people out of their situation sometimes, or teaches them through a story or a narrative. So
Mm.
that is much more my jam. Yeah, as you say.
I so there's like I'm always thinking. Well, not always. I wish it was always. I'm trying to think often about the podcasts that I create. Where do I have my blinders on? In other words,
Hmm.
I think most people who listen to this pod talk show are the same way. They're independent podcast creators, and
Yes.
one of the things that I think is really interesting, like, and let's talk about it, is your perspective on like I'm imagining podcast. What happens in your head is you're thinking about, okay, well, it's way easier than a movie. Like we don't need
Right.
lights and video cameras. People can be in their comfy clothes. Um, but it's still, there's more to it than just the part that people can hear. There's
Right.
also this in your thinking is like, maybe it's storyboarding, maybe it's scripting, maybe it's storytelling is clearly a thing. So I'm just thinking, maybe I'm not quite sure how to just like softball tee it up as a question, but I'm thinking what might be some things that people could think about if they're working by themselves
Mm.
and they get to like okay, I've recorded it and I'm all done with the thing and I put it out there and I'm like, I'm not in love with it. Like what are things that maybe we're not seeing that we maybe should have done way earlier, like before our
Right.
normal
Right.
process. Does that make sense to ask it
Oh,
that way? Like, well,
absolutely.
what are
Absolutely.
unknown unknowns?
So just for a little context, I spent about 15 years trying to make movies and be famous in Hollywood. So I'm not famous in Hollywood, and that's okay. I decided absolutely um, that there's more to life than kind of begging for someone to give you an opportunity to tell a
Mm,
story that's very close to your heart. And we just finished the writer's strike. The actors are still striking. And there was also a point where I realized I wasn't certain I could make a living in the business.
mm,
It's very glamorous. Certain people get to be on TV and have their words spoken and say awesome stuff, but I know too many people who have been famous for a minute
mm-hmm.
and have great jobs as security guards or at law firms, and it just didn't really add up for me. So in the filmmaking space a couple years ago, it became a hot thing for everybody to film something on their iPhone. And
Mm-hmm.
it was fairly funny because there was like all of this stuff. You could just take your iPhone and go make a movie. There's a movie in the theater right now that somebody made on their iPhone. And most of us have the experience of taking some video on our iPhone and it not looking like a like an
Yeah.
action
Oh, there's
movie.
something missing. Yeah. It's called
Definitely
cinematography
not
and a
being
director
Oscar worthy, exactly.
and a
So,
script.
and it's a whole thing. And so I hear a lot of podcasts. People send me a lot of podcasts, and they're like, "Hey, listen to my stuff," and you could just tell they were full of something to say. They turn on the mic, they said it. They had some intro and outro music, and they're done. And there's definitely a point where it's that same thing, making your home movie versus making a film,
Mm.
um,
Yeah,
a
and home movies
cinematic
are great. Like
experience.
I know that you are not bashing, and I want to make it clear that I too am not bashing on people just like me who just make these things and ship them,
Yeah,
because that's great. It's the
listen,
question of if you
it's
then
awesome.
turn around and say, "Oh no, no, my show's not famous and I'm not making money." Okay, well, home movies don't make money.
Right, home movies don't make money, and listen, everybody who knows the people in the home movie, they love it.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are really into the thing you're talking about and or know you and or know the subject will
Yeah,
be
they
really
love it.
into the topic and the person and the personalities on the mic. I
Yeah.
don't mean to bash that. um, I am working in the podcast space, and I think as soon as you start trying to like reach out to strangers, sometimes you need a little more um, production to make it palatable, to make it a reasonable distraction from kids, family, work, your favorite song, the sports game that's on tonight. Like literally, we have so many distractions. You know,
Mm.
um, I'm not a big wrestling fan, but I heard that Vince McMahon said a profound thing years ago. He said wrestling is not competing with the other wrestling team. We're competing with football, we're competing with concerts, we're competing with everything else you could be doing in your life at this time. And I think it's silly to say stuff like we're at peak podcasts, but anybody could podcast. And getting on somebody's like what I listen to every week playlist, just requires a
That's
bit
a tall order.
more. And I think a big part of that is production, and just making sure your audio sounds good, making sure that you've cut off your clips and your ticks, and you gotten a few breaths out if um, people are stuttering, and they can't find their words.
I'm not
Uh,
editing that out.
and don't
It
take it
wouldn't
out.
make any sense, right?
But I think the big thing is, these days I am starting to be on the mic, and I have a lot of sympathy for people who don't want to edit their podcast, because one of the worst things that you can, well, sorry, one of the worst things I do is listen to my own voice.
Mm.
And I immediately, because I know how to use some post production tools, go into wanting to fix
Yep.
it. And so cutting out the breaths, the ums, the breeze, the p's that are popping,
Yep.
the table,
Sibilance.
the
Yeah.
table noise, like all of that stuff, all of that stuff. But it helps to make a more professional product. And as soon as you start talking to anybody beyond your circle, beyond the classes that have to listen to this, beyond the people who live in this community who are invested in hearing what you have to say, regardless
Yeah, they're
of.
listening through. I don't want to say listening despite, but they're listening
Yeah,
through the medium. Like the
exactly.
medium that I'm making a gesture with my hands, like I'm moving the medium out of the
Yeah,
way to part the waters to get to the thing that I wanted. So as long as it's not in the way, a lot of times the indie podcast will say, take out everything that's in the way. If the music's too loud or it's too noisy, or like, but that's a home movie is a great way to put it. That's like the home movie level.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And so, every once in a while we shoot a whole movie and an alien lands, or a plane explodes in the sky,
right.
and we find ourselves,
Look,
oh, like,
Cloverfield. Yeah, it happens.
right,
Right.
I got the thing by accident, or I was able to capture the moment. I'm only thinking of bad things that you capture in the moment by accident. I don't want to necessarily go there, but
Oh, there's
sometimes,
every cute kid that's ever been caught at a
yeah,
wedding. There's like
yeah.
here, I
And
got the
then
nice examples.
and then the bloopers,
Right.
like
Funny
so.
dogs, right.
Exactly. So, absolutely you can capture that. You can capture the people who you really see as talented and amazing and dynamic and needing to have a light shine on them. And kind of the world will absolutely sit and listen to that if you could communicate that too. But I think I'm talking around another thing besides production, which is kind of what service your podcast offers.
Hmm.
Because I think I hear a lot of podcasts uh, where people say, this podcast I listen to sounds like people are just having fun. I listen to my morning drive time show, and these people are just really goofing off on the mic every day. They have millions of listeners. I'm going to make a podcast like that, and you don't
How much
understand
production work went into just air quoting, just having
exactly,
fun every day? It's like the old radio
exactly,
DJs on the morning show. Those guys
absolutely.
worked together for 30 years. One of them's the color man. One of them's, yeah.
Exactly.
So,
And so it's like telling a joke. We can all tell a joke, but not all of us should be comedians.
hmm.
And like there's a level of experience that comes with that. And I think interviewing is something you can really kind of improve on quickly. But there's definitely a question of not just improving who you are, but remembering what service does this offer
Hmm.
the audience. I have a podcast, Bun Amigos. It's a travel podcast for kids and families who love to learn. And I have actors speaking on microphones. I have sound design to set you in the place that these imaginary buddies are
Or
traveling to in the
visiting, right?
world this week, right? But this is absolutely um, in response to growing up and hearing Schoolhouse Rock, you
Hmm.
know, and knowing how a bill got through Congress in the
Oh,
70s.
don't get it
You
stuck in my head. Don't do it.
I learned my times. I learned my timetables,
Yeah.
in commercials in between TV, and so during COVID, I was working on a totally different project that was also scripted fiction, where I wrote the script, I brought in the actors, I, got the sound design, I had the mixer, the engineer
Yeah. Do you have an
recording the
engineer?
voices
Yeah.
and
We're in
doing
a
the whole
sound booth.
thing.
We're in a studio, right?
And it was an action adventure thing, and like I'm really excited about it still, like 3-4 years later. But it occurred to me, I don't know who this provides a service to. And this is not a free endeavor. I'm spending money, like not as much money as it would take to go and get an animator to animate this.
Yeah.
Not as much money as it would take for me to like put these people on camera and get stunt people and camera
Hmm.
people to light it so you see the adventure, but money nevertheless. And it occurred to me, if I didn't know who this was for, this might just be a vanity project. And so I had another idea. We weren't able to travel during COVID, and me and my family love to travel. I've been to 54 countries. My kid is 11. He's been to 9 countries. And like, this is just kind of the culture of my family. So, um, a kids travel podcast just kind of came out of the blue as, we were pining for getting on a plane one day soon. And I was just rethinking about all the places I'd been to, and the people I met, the
Hmm.
waiters, the hotel people, the other travelers on the road. And during COVID, we had some real existential moments, and one of the things I wondered
Yeah.
was,
Things got
and I
monochromatic.
right, and I hoped and I prayed that like the people I had met in my journeys were also well, because like there we had the coroner driving around my neighborhood pretty regularly in those early days of COVID, and that was pretty dark, pretty
That's
dark.
sobering. Yeah.
And so this travel podcast for kids idea came to mind, and I ended up doing it instead of my action adventure thing because I knew who it was for. I knew what service I was offering. And if you're going to go through the effort of creating a podcast, who cares? You know? So, what I know is that families who drive around in cars, sometimes want to just keep their kids quiet. And I know that's in order to do that, I used to put on podcasts for my kid. And
Yeah.
so I know as long as there's going to be new kids, there's going to be a parent who wants some peace of mind.
What's a piece of this? Press play. How long is that? It's 15 minutes. Perfect.
Exactly. And you can line up the queue and we can
Right.
we can get where we got to go. Um, Also, my kid got into science podcasts, don't like Brains On and
Mm.
Wow in the World, um, which, by the way, also are very scripted, have
And
lots of sound
very
design,
specifically for,
very very
they know who it's for.
polished, but they provide a very specific service to a very particular audience. And I said, huh, I can absolutely do something like that. And Bun Amigos was born. And so
Mm.
this past week they hopped to Yosemite National Park, and in
Yes,
two
it was a
weeks
two-parter, part one and
they're
part two.
they're hopping to Paris, France, and then they're going to, I want to say, New Orleans or New York or something like that.
Mm.
Um, Everything's queued up, but a lot of people who approach podcasting don't consider the who and the why. Like, why does somebody give you time in their day? Why does somebody give you time in their life to be part of their life? Because I'm sure you've had podcasts where you've talked about the parasocial relationship between a
Hmm.
podcaster and their listener. And I listen to way too much Seth Godin, who talks a lot about people opting into these experiences, these relationships with people. And like, I got too much going on to really take on
To
new
commit, right?
podcasts. And
Yeah.
let me tell you, like, when somebody's podcast starts getting a little rough around the edges or inconsistent in its release, that's kind of when I start looking for somebody else to come off the bench to be
Mm.
part of my rotation. And so, and I'm also that dude who, like many people these days, when I want to learn something new, I go look on YouTube. I go check my podcast catcher. I Google and I look for an interview, you know, and hey, those interview podcasts come in really handy at that point.
Yeah.
I'm working on a project right now about Frankenstein. Some of my peers from my what, Akimbo podcast workshop days in what, 2021,
Probably
22.
21, 22, maybe. I don't know.
um
We had the
they
discussion. We weren't sure which one you went
Right,
through.
they may remember some real cringy moments of me on the microphone talking about kind of why I think Frankenstein's still important today. And I've interviewed some really amazing people. And you come across a name, and especially if you're working on a podcast, the first question is, um, oh, you're
Uh-oh.
working on a name, and the first question is this person a good talker? Is this person a good
Yeah.
interview?
Is this even going to work? Right.
Is this even gonna work? Like, you might be very eloquent with the pen and very awkward on the microphone. And
Yeah.
so, you could do some quick Googling and find some good podcasts and you can learn some stuff. People are learning with podcasts, kids are learning with podcasts. For me, Bun Amigos made a lot of sense. And I hope my scripted fiction action anime podcast, finds a place in the world soon. But
Well,
we,
let me ask you another question around.
yeah,
So, a lot of times indie podcasters, after, I don't know, let's say like 40 episodes, if I had to guess, they start to go, I have signed myself up for a Mobius strip. Like this,
yep,
just there's no end, right?
yep, yep.
And then the discussion of seasons comes up. And like, well, seasons doesn't really fix your problem. And I'm thinking, I don't know when I had this idea, but I've had this idea a while where I went, okay, movies, there's a part where the movie is done, and
Right.
that is before, I mean, other than the test screenings, that's before anybody sees it. So it's like there's this huge life to the whole thing,
Hmm.
and that's it's not weird, right? Because storytelling, stories have beginning, middle, and end, unless you're doing something intentionally, like you're purposely trying to break the mold. But stories have those three parts, and movies have those three parts. And a good podcast episode has those three parts if you can pull that off. And I,
Absolutely.
I really think I want to say like your experience or your perspective from, I'm going to say real world production, applying that to podcasts, I think there's fertile ground there for indies to say, oh, maybe my problem isn't I don't want to do the grind or I don't know how to stop. Maybe my problem is I should have decided up front what does done look like? Is
Right.
this, so like, all right, my definition of done is every one of these episodes is meant to be entirely independent. So
Hmm.
if I publish this one and never do another one, it's okay
Hmm.
because it's not like I left something hanging. And if I also do 500 more of them, they'll all be basically the same thing, with slight changes because each one is about that one person. So,
Right.
but that's a very clear thing for me. And I'm just wondering if maybe there's a thing I was going to say you're lucky to have, but that's not quite the right way to
Uh,
put it.
a little
Like there's a,
insight I might bring to the table is that I'm very form oriented,
hmm,
and I look at podcasting, writing books, uh, uh, making movies, very much like cooking. How many people are we feeding? How long does this take to? How long do we have to get it to the table? You know,
can
and
I get asparagus this time of year? Right.
and are these people, only here for one day? And does this have to be a special, wonderful experience? Like, does this have to be the most memorable thing, or will burgers do?
Hmm.
So I think a lot of times people approach podcasts and they see the infinite possibility, and I think
Amen. Yeah.
really the ability to make it a marathon comes when you understand what limitations you can put in place for yourself. And so, spending some time thinking about your intro and your opening, um, because once you set that up in your editing software, it's done. Um, Knowing what parts you need, knowing, are you going to ask the same questions in every show? How long is this interview going to be? Um, I think there is definitely a beauty in being able to approach something knowing I have to do three things and it'll be done. And
Yeah.
suddenly it's not overwhelming. Please fill out the questionnaire. Please,
Yeah.
uh,
Send me
uh,
a headshot
yeah, send
beforehand.
me a
Right.
headshot beforehand. I need these three links so I can put it out. And you kind of get your head around like, what is this thing? I have a couple of dear friends. I love them dearly. I tell them on a regular basis because they ask my opinion all the time. Please give me a 30-minute podcast and not a 2-hour podcast. Please don't ramble. Please,
Or at
like,
least edit if you're rambling.
like, you know, again, I don't know if I've said this in this interview. Um, I like the idea that a podcast is an agreement between two people. And it's hard for us to see it that way, especially if we grew up watching network TV, back in the 80s and
Yeah.
90s, because what we knew was that this show was going to be an hour or 30 minutes. What we knew is that I only have 3 or 4 more minutes before I can go to the bathroom without missing anything. What we knew was it's 4 in the afternoon. I'm going to get a certain kind of content that is going to be fine for my family. Oh, it's 10 at night. The kids need to go to bed. It might be a little more risque. There are these agreements. There's this culture that we we're able to depend upon. And with podcasting, I can get on the microphone. I can say anything I want. I could tell you who to vote for. I could tell you what I think about COVID or 9/11 or whatever. And um, at the same time, I could show you how to make my favorite chicken dish. And you might come for the chicken dish. You may or may not want the rest. You may not want to hear my favorite hip hop song. And I think it touches on service, like what service are we providing to our audience? But I think if you know what goes into your show, if your show has a format, you also can start building a level of trust with your listener so that they understand your agreement. Because nobody wants to listen to the podcast that says, this is what we're going to talk about, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're not going to do.
Every time.
We're
Oh,
looking for people like us who say the thing in a way that we would say it so we can understand it, right? So um, I think that format thing really helps with creating that contract with the listener. Um, there's really an opportunity that a lot of people miss on for music cues to say, "Hey, we're almost done." I used to go to church, and the pastor would always say, "Let me wrap up," and that meant we were going to be here for 20
there's
more
our
minutes.
yeah. depending on depending on the subtext of the cue. Yeah. And one more thing. Oh
And
no.
one more thing. Right, right, right. We've all had those long goodbyes. And so there's a certain point where, as podcasters, we have an opportunity to like let the listener know this show's going to go a little longer. I'm often annoyed by the people who start their podcast saying the audio wasn't great today, but we thought the conversation was important. That takes me out of it, right? But then I hear the audio and I'm like, oh, I'm glad they said that because I don't want to listen to all of these crackles and pops and drops of audio. And are you still there? I don't
Yeah.
want to hear that. But you've told me we have a relationship, as a parasocial relationship. You've told me you thought this was important, so I'm going to stick it out. You
Yeah.
know, and
Especially if
and
it's
hear it.
off the yeah. Normally where it's like this and this one is different. It's like, all right, look out, guys. This one's different.
Right.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
But in having a relationship with your audience, you can really use your intro to kind of set up the what we're going to do. You can really have a rhythm. I'm going to ask all the same questions. And so audiences are going
Yeah.
to come in and know where we are in the interview at all times because they know the next question coming. And maybe they care if we're asking good questions.
Oh, it's yeah, there's a million variations on what the structure
Right.
could be.
I've listened to so many shows that the show is wrapping up. Okay, now we're going to ask our questions we ask every
Yeah.
interviewer, and that's a cue to the audience that we are in the I like this word. I don't know if I'm using it right. The denouement.
Yeah.
We're in the
That's the right
coming
word.
down. You know, I like that word.
That's the
Um,
right word. I often
we're
refer to the turn signal. I have another show that has a
we're at,
signature question. I tell the guest
yeah.
beforehand, it's the turn signal. When you hear me say that, you'll be like, we're
There,
getting
there you
off the
go.
highway.
We're getting off the highway. We're going to stop going so fast. A lot of people use it, especially for interviews and shows that have profound topics that might be very emotionally moving or engaging. They then have a something that lightens the mood, so that we can kind of enjoy having had the thoughts, but and so I think there's a definitely a question of format, and you can think about it like your teacher taught you how to write an essay. You know, beginning, middle, and
Yeah.
end,
Learn the form, master
opening,
the form, then you can break
um,
the form.
three
Yeah.
arguments, and then a conclusion. You can think about it however you want. I see it happen. I see it not happen, and it just feels a little messy when you don't know where this is going, and then suddenly it's over. I've heard some podcasts like that, and yeah. I currently am doing an interview show for the RPG Academy Show and Tell, and I come in, I prep the guest. Hey, we're gonna talk about in this case role playing games, tabletop role playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm gonna ask you some questions. I give them about half the questions so that they're not totally prepared, so that some of it like sounds
Comfy. Yeah.
spontaneous,
Some of it's
you
comfy, some of
know.
it's spontaneous. Yeah.
Right. And then at the end, I start asking my ending questions, and we say goodbye and we call it a day. And I try to do that in 25 minutes because That's the agreement I've made with my audience.
Terrific. As I often say, that's my turn signal. Uh, Mo, I was really super curious to see which of the various threads we were going to pull on. I think that's a really great one, and I think it's a really good opportunity to shine a light on some of the things that most of the people who know who I am and who listen to me are not aware of the things that you were talking about, would be my guess. I think most of the people that know who I am and listen to my shows are in the indie, totally one person doing it by themselves space. So
Right.
thank you so much for sharing all that. One thing that we didn't do anything of is if people would like to get in touch with you, can you give me some email addresses or domain names, or how do people get a hold of you if they want to pester you?
Just for fun, my URL for my website is ashyfeet.com, ASHYFEET.com. I figured it's hard to find a good URL these days.
Yes.
And I could do something that was misspelled that you have to remember to misspell. And so
That's rough.
I don't have the billions of dollars to help you misspell Flickr or Lyft or whatever. So I'm just kind of keeping it simple and hopefully fun and funny. You can listen to Bun Amigos, BUNN Amigos, all one word, no space. If you have little people in your life. I also worked on a podcast documentary, the class of 1989. So if you want to see me kind of in my bag trying to do this, like, what's a format thing over
And
an
in
eight.
'89, as you were saying, like if you hear me, something went wrong in '89. You're not audible. Like '89 is you're in production on that.
Oh,
Did
that's
you?
done. That's
But
done and out in the
I
world.
meant like you are you did
Oh, right.
production. You're not the voice on the right.
Yeah, correct. If
Yeah.
you hear me, either I'm doing a thing and really like testing the waters. I'm doing an interview like this, or something went wrong. Um, um,
So
and
1989 is another show that people can listen to.
yeah, the class of '89. It's a documentary that explores the six black films from 1989 that changed the direction of cinema. Um, you may also consider doing a show on saying what your show is in a pithy way. So that like so that people get hooked, and
Yeah.
hopefully next fall you guys will all be aware. I'll let Craig know to please let folks know about Frankenstein Was a Black Dude, which is a podcast documentary about Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, and how, like, the stuff around Frankenstein and the writing there of Frankenstein really, from 200 years ago, really rhymes with what's going on today in a lot of inner
Hmm.
cities. Um, I need to work on that pitch and that pithy.
Well, early days. Early
um,
days. Happy to hear a
yeah.
prototype of it. I think that was great.
But yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff going on, and I work in podcast production for lots of people. So if you're looking for somebody to produce, edit, or book folks for your podcast, and you have a budget, feel free to reach out. If you like advice, I'm full of it. Ask my wife, and that's who I am.
Well played. All right. Well, as I said before, terrific. Thanks so much, Mo, for taking the time. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much, Greg.